Primitive electronics?
Third installment. What I did this time out, I chose two records in which synthesizers were a relatively minor, but in terms of the amount of time you actually hear them on the record, but I think they were both important to each record.
That we can just open this up and interpret the words. Maybe it's primitive and not electronic. Maybe it's electronic or electronic in the case where it's using samples or tape loops or music concrete or field recordings.
But
Electronic.
as for primitive electronics, yeah, I don't know. I decided that it had to be electronics used by a pre-Columbian society.
My first record is Mike Oldfield's Omadon, from 1975. Uh, this guy, he was part of the English, Prague folk scene, late 60s into the 70s. He ended up playing on something that came to Richard Branson's attention, who was just starting out Virgin Records. And this was Tubular Bells, a song that became really, that went really big, in which probably most of the people watching this would recognize, even if they don't know the name or they've never heard of Mike Oldfield, simply because it became like sort of unofficial theme of The Exorcist. This is his third. He did sort of three records, all within a few years of each other, all of them very good, all of them kind of a mix of prog rock, particularly English folk, and each one sort of increasingly ambient or new agey. He played most of the instruments on most of these albums. So there was a lot of studio trickery involved. I mean, there were hundreds of punch-ins. This record in particular, and he tended towards long, sort of side long pieces, and that's true here. There's a part one and a part two, and they each take up a full side. And this one, there's a lot of guitar, a lot of sort of piano. Um, there are synth parts, which are some of the best parts in my mind. Um, that kind of sound like Tangerine, a little bit like Tangerine Dream, and a little bit like, new age private press stuff. But there's a whole lot of treated guitar as well, which sort of, it's very catchy, actually. Um, it's pretty epic in its own, new agey way. And it's a really good listen. Number two, going in a somewhat different direction. This is Amebix's Monolith. These guys are they pretty much invented the crust subgenre of metal and punk. Um, this is their second full album, and it's sort of the less heralded one, I think. Their debut, Arise, tends to get most of the praise, but I think this one's a little better. This one's definitely heavier. It's more metal. They are still by no means virtuosos, which only sort of adds to the atmosphere. And they use the synth. It's very sparing, but they use it to really, really good effect. It is eerie as hell. It's super atmospheric, and that synth sound was a big part of it. So, my highest recommendation, Amebix Monolith.
So this is a new release by an Italian, Roberto Muschi, Goodbye Monsters, from this year. Now he's known for the classic album, The Loa of Music, an extreme break in Italian classical music. And it's a good example of what new electronic musicians are doing, where they're blending field recordings, music concrete with instrumentation. And here the concept, in pretty much all his records, the concept is samples from indigenous voices and rhythms, and then combined with his own instrumentation and vocals, to create a unique sonic landscape. There's plenty of effects loops, and it's like experiencing the Indonesian jungle at night or walking through the streets of Bangkok at 4 a.m. There's also, particular on this record, there's a jazz tribute to Keith Tippett, um, where he's sort of combining a modern classical with a free jazz feel. That's just one tune. And this would be a great album for fans of Tuxedo Moon, and I keep it in my modern classical. So Roberto Muschi. And my second choice is this is probably inspired by Wendy Carlos's Switched On series. This is The Electronic Spirit of Eric Satie, subtitled Music Myths Mystically Inspired from 1972. Oh, and also it says on the cover, featuring Mood's synthesizer with a Camerata Contemporary Chamber Orchestra. So, yes, and it's true. The orchestra members who were not familiar with the Moog instrument uh, took turns coming up with arrangements for Eric Satie pieces. And because of that, the Moog is used very primitively. So, and the Moog is sort of irascible anyway, in its early form. So, I mean, anything that involves Eric Satie is going to be strange. And a lot of these compositions have strange titles like Flabby Preludes for a Dog, A Woman That Talks Too Much. There are also spoken word markers between each tune, and in some case, each part of a tune. So they pronounce it in French and then in English. And some of the times they sort of start giggling or start laughing. Anyway, this can be interpreted on two levels. It's got the Moog and where the Moog and the orchestra interact. And it's also believed to be mystically communicated to Satie from a medieval cleric. You see on the cover here, this sort of represents that communication. And also, the orchestra itself claimed to have telepathically, from beyond the grave, communicated with Satie in coming up with their arrangements for this album. You see the back of the cover, that sort of represents the Moog electronic parts of it. So, Satie was such a strange guy. He only ate white food. He slept on a round bed with a hole for his head to stick through. He had two grand pianos stacked on top of each other. He composed on the lower one and then threw various sheet music into the upper one, and also all his letters went up there. He was a true eccentric. And this particular album happens to be a favorite of the hip NYC WFMU. So they played the hell out of it. Technically, he's an impressionist, a classical impressionist or minimalist, and I keep it with my modern classical. And that's Eric coming up
Okay.
on the fly.
All right. Well, I've got Curiosum by Cluster, the ever great Cluster, a band founded originally with a K, but that at some point dropped in favor of a C. But it's two guys for the main, Möbius and Rodelius, two German gentlemen who um, are pioneers of minimalist electronic music, and that's what this is right here. So it qualifies as primitive, certainly in well, both sort of historically because they've been there since the first germination of electronic music in the 60s. Sort of non-lab based synthesizers were made available, like Moog synthesizers and other portable devices. And then it's also primitive in the sense that the mood it evokes is, to my mind at least, very primitive. I mean, what we've got here on the cover are just some simple geometrical shapes, and the sounds of the songs correspond to those geometrical shapes. Anyway, you've got a minimal palette that is richly exploited in songs that sort of conjure up these scenes of primordial matter moving at this kind of slow, wavy rate. The instrumentation here is, I believe, all electronic or heavily processed. This is originally appeared on the Always Great Sky Records label, and Redelius and Möbius, collaborated with people like Brian Eno. It doesn't have an ambient quality, but it sort of does work itself into the background texture of lots of situations. So it's very unobtrusive music, and you can devote as much attention to it as you want, and it'll reward attention, but it by no means commands it. Yeah, this is from 1981. They've got a bunch of records spanning the 70s and well into the 80s, and in fact, I think they were still going. All their stuff is worth checking out, and this one in particular because it's so wonderfully stripped down and texturally rich, I would say. Okay, so that's item number one. Item number two is a French band with a German name, but it's been reissued a couple times now in France. It's Ich bin, or I am, and it's an Alsatian outfit. So I guess that is the part of France that formerly was Germany. And they've got a somewhat fanciful map of their country right here. There's a lot to unpack in this map. There's a lot to unpack in the music, but perhaps not as much as in the map. The music is actually kind of wonderfully straightforward because it's just some people like with some basic keyboards that are being used to make well, very primitive sounds, and sort of these vocals screamed and grunted on top of it. Well, subjects include bodybuilding, involuntary organ donation. It sounds sort of like that, sort of a little bit like suicide, but without as much sequenced sound. There isn't a lot of sequencing. There's a lot of sort of strange little sort of trailing noises and burbles and thuds, and lots of fun vocals with so again this kind of big evil daddy voice, and then like the little scared child voice. Ich bin, the album's called Obey or Obey, involuntary physical fitness session, where somebody is barking at you and telling you about the godhead of Arnold Schwarzenegger, as occurs in one song, but cutting edge nonetheless.
It's a ram.
It's a goat.
It's a ram. It's a goat. It's a goat. It's a goat.
And why are goats satanic?
I imagine it has something to do with scapegoats, when they literally would take an animal and banish it, with
Sins of a community. That's a biblical practice.
We're talking about Rush. We're talking about Rush.
That's your problem.
That's some weirdo shit.